This is the Russini Report. With the Athletic senior NFL insider, Dianna Russini.
Welcome to the Athletic Football Show. I'm Robert Mays. Joining me for this week's edition of the Russini Report, it is the senior NFL insider at the Athletic, Dianna Russini. Dianna, how are you?
Robert, I'm good. I'm not a big fan of, darkness taking over around 4:45, 4:30 now, but that tells me that we are beginning the second half of the season.
We're here. It's November. We're past the trade deadline, but still plenty to discuss today. Let's start with some big quarterback news in Arizona. We were always wondering coming into the year, when would we see Kyler Murray be the starting quarterback for the Cardinals? Why would we see him? What the timeline was and why that timeline existed. We are going to see him this week. It was already been announced. Jonathan Gannon said he will be the starting quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals. I'd like to know more about why that decision was made and what went into it within the building in Arizona.
Yeah, so from what I can gather, this is a GM and a head coach who did not draft Kyler Murray, did not give him that extension. This was a completely different regime that dealt with Kyler, right? So we have brand new set of eyes, a brand new style, really. And they want to experience the Kyler Murray quarterbacking themselves. They want to see what he's all about, from learning about him as a person in the building, in the locker room, to what he's like at practice, and really how he handles adversity, how he handles successes out on the field. So this is an audition, and it's very clear that this is what it is. And I can tell you that this organization wanted to be really smart about when they played him. They want to make sure he's healthy, right? Because we're just about less than 11 months from when he had that knee injury. So here we are, where he's expected to be activated on Wednesday, and is also expected, if all goes well, of course, he will get that start.
There was so much talk about Kyler's kind of presence in the building with the previous regime, questions about study habits, questions about leadership skills. And I know you've had conversations with people in Arizona the same way I did this summer. By all accounts, he had been really good with this new regime, just his presence and working with him every single day. So the behind the scenes elements of the Kyler Murray experience, from all that I had gathered, were going pretty well. Now we get to see what the on-field elements of the Kyler Murray experience look like for this staff specifically.
Yeah, and for those watching that may have not heard that, there were some whispers around the league, and up until yesterday too, Robert, from people that I was talking to, that perhaps Arizona would make the decision not to play him because of the injury clause he has in his contract. So essentially, if he were to get hurt this season, the Cardinals organization would have to pay him a boatload of money. So it may make sense, if they want to move on, for him to not play him and then see how this season goes and perhaps go for that quarterback in the draft. But that is obviously not what this head coach and GM see. They want to see if they have something in front of them, and perhaps Kyler is the answer, but they don't know that yet. So they're going to have to test it out.
Right or wrong, I think a lot of people assumed that if this team ended up near the top of the draft, they would take one of those blue chip quarterback prospects we've all been talking about, Caleb Williams, Drake May, and move on and get whatever they could for Kyler Murray. That's still possible. So I guess my question is, and this is probably unknowable at this stage, is this an audition for Kyler Murray to be the long-term starting quarterback of the Arizona Cardinals? Or is this an audition for the rest of the league that might be interested by Kyler Murray at the end of the season if Arizona's draft position lands in a certain range?
The sense I have received is, and look, this could be them putting those smoke screens out to all of us to start spreading the news that Kyler is great. This is a guy you want, because as you sort of alluded to there, not everything has been great surrounding Kyler Murray over the years in terms of his leadership, in terms of his likability, and some of that stuff was in question, and that's known around the league. So yeah, there's a narrative out there that I know the player is going to they want to change it. His camp wants to change it. But the conversations I have had have felt as if they want to see what he can do. They want to see if perhaps he is the answer. Because I can tell you, outside of Arizona, there are others who believe he is still a really good quarterback. and he can still play, and it would be a mistake to move on from him. So I think this is going to be a really interesting experiment to watch and see how they operate over the next few weeks. And I'm sure we'll look back on this show next season and be like, ha, that's what that was about. Because as of now, it just looks as if they're trying to see if Kyler can be the guy of the future.
This has ripple effects all around the league because if they do wind up with one of those top 2 picks and they land on Kyler Murray as their starter of the future, how many different sharks are going to be swimming around then looking to trade up into one of those 2 spots? Because I think it's just kind of been assumed that if Arizona lands there, one of those quarterbacks is off the board. But if they ultimately decide, no, we feel comfortable rolling with Kyler. It's a bird in the hand. We know what he is. He's shown great flashes. We can use these picks to kind of rebuild the entire rest of the roster. Then there's potentially an open door for all of these teams that don't have an answer at quarterback and are at least within range to try to trade up into one of those picks. So this is not just about Kyler's future and the Cardinals' future. This could potentially shift the future for another organization or a handful of them looking to get up into one of those spots.
I'd be curious if Cardinals fans want to see Kyler ball out and continue with him and roll, or they would, or if they're comfortable with saying, all right, next year, you know?
When I was looking at teams that could potentially be in the Kyler Murray sweepstakes after the season was over, if Arizona was going to trade him, one of the landing spots, just from a need perspective, felt like Minnesota might make sense. Their quarterback future, though, seems to be shifting a little bit in real time. Obviously, we know everything that happened with Josh Dobbs on Sunday. It's one of the best stories in the NFL. But what I really want to dig into is something that you wrote the day before we saw Josh Dobbs, and that talking about Kirk Cousins' future, it seems like there are people within the building in Minnesota that are open to the idea and honestly want Kirk Cousins back on some sort of deal next season as they figure out what their quarterback of the future scenario looks like. So what have you heard about the potential fit with Kirk coming back to Minnesota when it seemed like that relationship was probably over?
Well, let's start with what we've all heard. And if you missed it, Kevin O'Connell was asked about Kirk's future right around the time when Kirk was getting the Achilles tendon surgery. And he said, you know how I feel about Kirk. And it was just in a roundabout way of saying, basically, if you cover this team, you know I love Kirk. And Kirk loves me. He loves this offense. And we've had so much success. You've seen what we were doing. We were doing without our top receiver. So with that in mind, Kevin O'Connell has power obviously in the building, but he doesn't have all power. He's got strong influence. So what does that leave you? Well, you have that the front office having to mull over, and the game plan has been to get a young quarterback with the thought that if they could bring Kirk back to, of course, have the ideal plan of the Kansas City model with Alex Smith there and Patrick Mahomes learning underneath him and then eventually taking over as the starter when he was ready, or maybe they went a little too late on that because he was ready really early. But that model, that formula is what the goal would be. Now, so much has changed since Saturday since I wrote that, because now Kirk Cousins is injured. He won't be able to, well, if he's not on the Aaron Rodgers program that I know of, but let's just say he's a normal person at 35 years old and it's going to take the normal amount of time. We'll see him next season. From the Cousins camp, the Cousins side of this, they would be smart from the business side before this injury to listen to the highest bidder, right? Because there's got to be people in the market that are interested in him. I don't know specifically what Kirk wanted. I don't, based on what we've seen from the Netflix show and even just having conversations with him, he loves Minnesota. His 2 little boys are there. They're part of the community. They seem to love it. I'm also a big Julie Cousins fan. I watch her Instagram. They seem very comfortable. I'm a big, big fan of the wives because they tell the real story. They don't hide anything. They like put their emotions out there. So you can see how happy they are in Minnesota in terms of their life. I know social media is fake. I know those that are watching are like, whatever, it's all fake. It's all filters. But with that in mind, I now it changes because I do believe that Kirk's market will be different coming off the
Yes.
injury because of his age, obviously because of what he would be dealing with. We don't know where he will be at. A lot of this will be timing in terms of his health, and which teams would be desperate enough. So maybe this works out for everyone where Kirk gets to stay. Maybe he doesn't make as much money as he would wanted as he wanted to, but he gets to stay in Minnesota, and Kevin O'Connell gets to keep his guy, and they still get to draft perhaps a future quarterback. But based on how they're playing right now, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to do that, Robert.
The front office specifically, I think, had done a very intentional job of making sure the decks were clear heading into next year.
Yeah.
They had shed veteran salaries at other positions. They didn't extend Kirk to save money. He was truly going to be hitting free agency. They were going to be able to potentially turn the page to the next era of the franchise. And I know that's difficult when you're dealing with a quarterback who's played as well in stretches as Kirk has, but I think they were very clear-eyed about what needed to happen at that position moving forward. On Kirk's side of it, I think the starting point for a Kirk Cousins contract this offseason, if he had stayed healthy, would have been what Derek Carr got from the Saints. We're talking about $40 million a year, and Kirk is playing better than Derek Carr did last season, even if he's a couple years older. So the Minnesota Vikings, while trying to turn the page, you can't pay that sort of money to a stopgap bridge quarterback, even if it's one that's been successful in your building and one that everyone likes having around. Well, now, if it's not going to be that $40 million a year, and you're thinking, maybe it's 1 year, $30 million for Kirk. Makes sense for him, makes sense for us. It's a bridge. He gets to rebuild his value a little bit if he wants to grab one more contract. That conversation starts to become more and more realistic. And potentially, if you're in position this year, because even if Josh Dobbs is a great story, your offense falls short a little bit. You lose more games than you were going to. You're sitting in the top 12 of the draft. Are you a team that can seek out your quarterback of the future and bring that guy along at the pace you want to, because you could bring Kirk back at a reasonable price? So it just feels like so many things have kind of fallen in line here, where it's easier for both sides of the building, the coaching staff that has to compete every day and the front office who has to take the long view on this, to find common ground in whatever this solution is going to look like.
And that's been the theme throughout the league, truly. Like, you encapsulated exactly what a lot of organizations are experiencing at this moment, right? And I think it's kind of a theme of our show today, of how teams are managing this roster, the future, and where do you go from here? There's no better tell of where we're at in terms of the season than that idea right now.
Going to be that model is always what teams are chasing. And I do know that that's ideally in a vacuum what the Vikings wanted to do, where they can draft a guy, but it's not somebody that you have to throw in the fire right away. And now that seems at least plausible. And I understand it. You look at all the bad quarterback play in the NFL right now and all the teams that are really struggling. And if you're Kevin O'Connell, I completely get looking at this entire landscape, looking at the guy in your building and how well he's playing, and just saying, what are we doing? Like, why are we going out and seeking out something else when this guy is playing at this level? But if you're Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah and you're looking at how championship teams are built, I also get looking at a $40 million a year price tag for a good but not elite quarterback and saying, this makes our pathway way too narrow. We just can't afford to have this sort of team build. So it's just a fascinating push and pull. And this is what happens, even with guys who I think are aligned, who I think are on the same page. There are always, even in aligned buildings, somewhat of competing motivations when you're talking about the coaching staff and the front office, because at the end of the day, they're often trying to do slightly different jobs.
Yeah, very much so. And that is always the challenge. And I apologize for looking down at my phone while you were articulating
You're working.
Fabulous point, but stuff is moving around right now. And, the Titans just announced, Mike Vrabel was at the podium, and he just announced what our next topic is going to be, which is they are going to be Ryan Tannehill's going to be stepping aside, and Will Levis, the rookie quarterback, is going to be taking over. There's some other quarterback stuff happening right now, and hopefully I'll be able to bring it to the show here in a few minutes. But I think we should dive into this, because we saw what Will was able to do in their win 2 weeks ago. Then obviously we saw against the Steelers. Still a lot of potential here that you saw in this game with his arm strength, his comfort in the offense already. I mean, this is a player that's not getting first team reps. Malik Willis is taking second team reps. Will isn't even getting that much practice. So just so much credit to him to be able to step in here and win this job over a tough 35-year-old quarterback himself, who's won some big games over the last 4 seasons for this team, who obviously has so much comfort in this offense. But we've seen what he is. We know what he is, and I do think this is a good decision by the Titans.
Can you just walk me through what the conversation was like? You cover this team as well as anybody does. You have a ton of familiarity with the people in that building and what their thought process often looks like. Ultimately, why did they land on Will Levis being the starter moving forward here?
Yeah, I think the thought all year was that Ryan was going to remain the starter throughout. I don't think they ever had a plan of playing anyone else.
It's
And
not
that
their
wasn't
MO. They're trying to win as many games as possible. That's how Mike Vrabel
exactly. They're
operates.
never building. And that, by the way, that's not a knock. It's credit to what they do build there, which is a winning attitude all the time of we're going to find guys and we're going to figure out. It may not look pretty, it may not be great, but we're going to put the effort in and we're going to be the most prepared team and the smartest team out there, even though it doesn't always reflect that every week. They're trying. And just talking to guys in the building, and I'm talking about players. um, Will gave them a spark when they were at home and they won that game in their Oiler throwback uniforms in front of that alumni crowd. And you could see it on TV. You could feel it yourself as just a viewer. I can't imagine what Nissan Stadium felt like. And, this is a fan base that I feel like has had nothing to root for. This was all going on while all the little whispers about Derrick Henry perhaps being on the move, maybe even DeAndre Hopkins. So it was really a perfect storm. And it worked out really well for, I think, everyone from the team, from where they're going, what direction they're going. And he really does give them a shot in the arm. And I think when you go from a guy like Ryan, who I've spent so much time around him over the years, from his time in Miami to in Tennessee, he's not a loud person.
Mhm.
He's just class all the time. He just does his job, does his work. He's cool with the guys, but you don't really notice him, to be honest. I mean, you physically notice him, but he just kind of blends. And that was his strength because it was never about Ryan Tannehill. It was always
He
about
was
the
it
team.
was a role player on one of the most efficient offenses in the NFL, and that's very difficult to be as a quarterback. I think we underrate his contributions to what the 2021 off, even at times 22 Titans looked like and how good that offense was, but he was a part of a whole there in a way that quarterbacks and those sorts of offenses often are not.
Yeah. Remember? I mean, people remember this, but Marcus Mariota was the starter. He was
Mhm.
the chosen one there. And Ryan came in just playing the backup role after getting pushed out of Miami. And he wins the job and then wins in a pretty dramatic fashion in terms of what they were able to do that year and take them all the way to the AFC Championship game. Um, and he won over that organization after that season. And he's been consistent, but we've seen the trouble. We've seen the stuff on offense. And you saw things in Will against Pittsburgh too, where he just look. Some of it's naivete, I believe. I'm not sure. I didn't get into the weeds with anyone there about what his strengths are. But for me, is just watching him. He just looks willing to take shots and take throws that I don't think Ryan would do at this point. And I think that's good. It's good for a team that is just trying to fight and survive and have success this season. So it is the Will Levis show now.
When you're deciding and weighing this sort of decision, I think you have to consider a few different elements. One, what is the best thing for the future of the franchise? The best thing for the future of the Tennessee Titans, undoubtedly, is Will Levis evolving into a quality starting quarterback on the price tag that exists for a second round pick. That would be a coup. It would be an incredible boon for this franchise if that ends up happening. So by doing this and playing him, you give yourself a chance at that happening. But the other side of it is you can't just weigh the future. You have to look at guys like Jeffrey Simmons and everyone else in that offense, DeAndre Hopkins, and say, we're trying, at least trying. We're giving some lip service to trying to win football games. And as long as that guy that you're trotting out there has some belief in the locker room and you can at least posture that you're trying to win games and giving everyone else in the locker room a shot, then I think that you check both boxes. And watching him play over the last 2 weeks, I think they check both boxes. I think you could absolutely sell it to the locker room where this guy gives us a shot. And if he's giving you a shot and it's the right move for the future, you run out of reasons not to put him in the game and not have him start for the rest of the year. And I think that's where Tennessee is.
So I have obsession with post-game locker room celebration in general. Like, I love watching it on my phone. I think a lot of people do, but the access now is so good, right? There's so many cameras. Remember back in the day, they would show for like 7 seconds only, and it was almost like people were frozen, right? Because they didn't want to show anything. And now it's like, I mean, look at the Raiders locker room. I mean, that was the best. I want to go to that party. It's Vegas, right? But with watching the body language of the players in that locker room specifically, after Pittsburgh, seeing some of the shots in there, it was like, he's the guy. Like, you just know. Like, you sense it, you feel it. And even just the reports coming out of there, you could tell that he has shown something in the way he's produced on the field, the confidence he has in the huddle. I think that's always a huge component in guys buying in. It's like, what's the confidence is everything in life. And I think he has it. And obviously his story just makes it awesome. Watching him hug his family like that after knowing what he went through, an embarrassing moment on live television and not even being at the draft when he got drafted. He was home in Connecticut. So it's a cool time, I think, for Titans fans now to see what he can be. And if he hits, man, I hope Rand Carthon buys the biggest house he possibly can, because he deserves it. And in making that decision to go with Will, and let's see if he's the future.
It's always funny how these things unfold in the NFL, where you need a break or two. So you need a break or two to go your way. They didn't plan on playing him. There's a chance that we just didn't see him at all this year, and you go into next season not understanding what you have, and that potentially affects your future plans. Ryan Tannehill tweaks an ankle in London. That's why we get to see Will Levis, and now you get half a season of his potential development. So sometimes you need to get a little bit lucky. Sometimes things need to go awry for you to actually land on the timeline that's best for you, and it feels like that's kind of what's happening here in Tennessee.
Exactly. I'm actually having me now thinking of like the best stories of a veteran getting hurt where a rookie steps in. I was just thinking more of like a backup stepping in. Obviously, the Eagles is comes to my mind right away with the Super Bowl, but I'd be interested in going back to see when was the last time we saw a rookie step in and have immediate success and take over.
Yeah, that wasn't supposed to start. CJ Stroud was the starter from day one. So
Yeah.
it's always interesting what kind of jolt these guys give. And I think that's what Will Levis has done. On the other side of it, a team that has had bad luck at quarterback so far this season and is staring at a pretty bleak reality, and that is the New York Jets. After what happened last night on national TV, where you have Troy Aikman just showing open disdain for how the Jets are playing on offense. Peyton Manning just losing his mind watching Zach Wilson. It's, to me, the most visible kind of shortcoming and the most visible failure for Wilson and that offense that we've seen so far this year. And I think it has kickstarted a conversation about what that situation looks like in New York. What is your sense of how long they can keep riding with Zach after moments like last night?
Yeah, and you do get a sense from listening to the players that they're frustrated, but I don't think it's as bad as you would maybe think it would be, which I think is great. And I think that's the Aaron Rodgers effect. I think he's influenced them, especially after he saw them on the sidelines pointing their fingers, and he came in, spoke to them on a team meeting, was like, yeah, we're not doing that here. We're not doing that. So his presence alone already changes a lot of the poison that most teams would experience, I think, because it's almost like, yeah, we can't do this with him here. Maybe when he's not around, we can get away with it. But with Aaron now being very visible in the building and over FaceTime, and obviously on the weekends when he flies in, that effect is important to this team's in staying together. And they are having a tough time collectively as an organization after that loss, having a few conversations today with people in the building, just feeling a little defeated, knowing that the defense played well and the offense looked as bad as it has all year. I'd be interested, in what Aaron feels about Zach right now too, just watching this and wanting the best for his team and knowing that this isn't good enough. The play calling is not good enough. The production is not good enough. So I think the Jets are going to continue to roll with Zach here, right? So there's thought that maybe they change right now. That's not the sense I'm getting. They're going to go with him again in an attempt to make some of these changes. And look, I'm not being overwhelmed today with Zach's the guy like I was 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago when I was coming on the show with you. And as much as I don't think you really were agreeing with us at the moment, I kept telling you the Jets keep telling me he's good. So I can only give you the message. Don't get mad at me. But the sense I'm getting is I'm not getting barreled over with, oh my God, he's our savior. But I don't think that they're ready to move on from him just yet.
It's not like they have a good alternative in the building. You're looking at Tim
Well,
Boyle as the
Tim
backup
Boyle.
quarterback there. It's difficult to say, this is definitely going to be better. My only concern would be somewhat what we talked about with Tennessee. If you're Quincy Williams, okay, Quincy Williams, who plays his heart out every single game, the energy and ferocity that defense plays with, to put that sort of effort in every single week and then be matched with the offensive production on the other side has to be demoralizing. Even more than some other really good defenses around the NFL, just their play style and attitude, they give so much. I just imagine them being sapped at the end of every single one of these. At what point do you have to make a change in service of those guys just to show them at least we're trying to do something different? We're trying to give you what you need on the other side of this, even if the answer in a Tim Boyle or whatever veteran they might sign is not satisfactory.
Well, you know what they are seeing, Robert, and I had somebody share this with me before that's part of the Jets. They're seeing Aaron Rodgers on the field in pregame, throwing the ball around, doing something that is, I mean, a miracle at this point in terms of how quickly he's been able to recover. So it's almost like he's become the poster to the rest of the team of let's keep working hard and playing our best on defense. Let's just say for this example, in hopes that if we can continue, if we can win, he comes back because he's doing everything he can do to try to get on the field. And he's physically showing that on the field. Look, I'm here. I'm getting better. We're not quitting. And I don't want you to quit. So I thought that was interesting, an interesting perspective from someone with the organization today of
It absolutely is. It's so different. It's just
it,
so different. Sometimes when you're looking at these scenarios where the quarterback is just not it, we know he's not it. You have to turn the page. There's not a Hall of Famer standing on the sideline as proof that there are brighter days ahead. So many of the dynamics here are just so strange and unique that I think it becomes difficult to understand exactly how Robert Saleh and the organization in general is supposed to navigate some of this stuff.
Yeah, and I think that they have a challenge on their hands. I think they know it's difficult to manage all this, knowing that they're not great, and everyone is just hoping and hoping. Just so almost just like let's close our eyes and squeeze in tight here, and just get to the end of the season and hope that we have a winning record, so Aaron can come back and save us again. And that's not a winning way to be. That's not something they want to really truly be mentally approaching the next few games here. But, you know, when you do see Aaron on the field, cameras all around him, every player's walking up to him, asking him about the timeline of all this. And I think there's more purpose to him standing out there than just the ego or perhaps, the showing off of look at me, look how quick I have returned. I am the Messiah. I think this is him telling his team, don't give up. It may not be great, but don't give up and I'll come back.
There's real power in that potentially. And again, you just don't often have that with teams that are struggling the way that the Jets currently are. So definitely something to monitor because I think they need that source of hope based on last night's performance. And again, what that defense is giving week in and week out. Dianna Russini, always great to chat with you. We will be back here same time next week. Appreciate all of you guys listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.